feeling
Paul,
frisky.
You make a good point. I want to say two things to it. One is, we have elections. Elections have consequences, right? I mean, we all learned that in the last two elections.
Sure.
Presidential elections specifically have a lot of consequences. So, if we feel that a president is taking too much leeway with power, we have the right to vote him out 4 years later. Additionally, in the meantime, if the election doesn't make itself available, we have a Congress that can either impeach or remove a president. We have a Congress that can pass laws that limit executive power, and we have a judiciary that can review. Somebody can take the president to court over an executive action, and the judiciary can review that. So I get the concern about absolute power. I agree. It is a corrupting force in politics. But the idea that the president's going to take an executive action on student loans, and that represents some sort of tyrannical power, I find that kind of argument hard to fathom.
Well, let's be honest. Student loans are, far from the worst thing. Now, granted, I certainly have a problem with that, because socialism never leads to anything good. But this isn't the idea I'm attacking. I'm attacking the idea that a federal government can be powerful enough, large enough, so that an executive office could have the power to take executive privileges like this. I mean, the reality is that they should be much smaller. They should be limited much more. And it's the fact that we're talking about this means that the federal government is just far too big.
Well, here, Paul, let me throw a little gunpowder on the fire there. Are there any groups that were created out of executive actions? Any notable organizations in the government that were created from executive power? I mean, I don't know the answer.
I'm not completely certain about that, although...
where do things like the FDA and things like that come from? Or is that all...
I'm going to guess that even if any of them were, they were later backed up by the legislature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. In order for any organization within the government to have some sort of budget, it would have to be granted by Congress, because Congress has sole budget authority.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe the National Security Director or any of the intelligence reforms after 9/11 that they might have been implemented by executive order, but then ultimately backed up by legislation in the long run.
Okay.
But even at that, I mean, we're essentially taking a system and we're saying, okay, you guys can regulate and you guys can make law. And make no mistake, they make law. And you don't have to be elected. You don't have to be in a position that you can be kicked out of office. You can make law. You can make the hard decisions for us.
Well, wait, put this in context for a second, Paul. Put it in context for us. Who exactly are you talking about making laws?
I'm talking about the
example.
FDA. I'm talking about
EPA.
EPA. You name it. I mean, any regulating body that's been produced in recent history.
Okay, so what exact power?
Yeah, but they're granted.
Go ahead, Nick.
But they're granted their rulemaking authority solely through acts of Congress. The EPA enforcing clean water standards, they're given those guidelines directly from Congress. They don't get to say, we must have this kind of water as of this date. Congress sets that. Fuel efficiency standards. The Congress grants them the authority to make those rules.
Well, of course, but it's not like those rules are voted on. They don't take those back to Congress and say, can we do this? I mean, if they did, a lot of people would be voted out of Congress.
But Congress can most certainly take action to undo rules, and they have done that in the past.
absolutely. But most of the time they don't, because most of the time these organizations are making rules so that they are able to support their buddies, so that they're able to take care of situations for other people, and make things a little bit easier on some folks and harder on others. It's part of the crony capitalism system that we've found ourselves in these days.
At some point, they're just making busy work in order to justify a renewed budget for the next year as well. I'd have to think. You'd think for some regulatory agencies, at some point, more or less, their work will be done. I understand there's always new drugs, pharmaceuticals being in need of approval and this and that, but say the EPA at some point, air and water standards, you'd think they'd be able to say, well, okay, these are pretty good, it's pretty comprehensive, but
but of course, with that said, even with their regulations, I mean, is it improving anything?
Yeah, no, not that I'm okay with them, but
no, I know. I wasn't suggesting that you were.
But I'm thinking of the food stamp program, that at some point, if they still have a budget left, they'd start advertising for food stamps, telling people, you might not know, but you are qualified for food stamps, and trying to give them out to people who otherwise don't even ask for them, just so they can get their budget approved for the next year. Because if you don't spend it, then automatically the budget's going to decrease.
Well, hey, Nick, back to the EPA. What do you think? Doing good? Not doing good?
I would say, yes and no. I mean, I think it's a folly to think that we don't have a cleaner environment because of the EPA. I mean, let's face it. We don't have lead. We don't have lead gasoline anymore. We don't have lead in our paint. There are definite there are good things that come out of regulation. The idea that a market can regulate itself, we're not going to always do what's best for the community involved. But is the EPA some beacon of great government? No, of course not. But it doesn't mean that it's not a useful tool.
Paul, I have this feeling you might want to rebut that.
Yeah. Is the EPA a beacon of even good government? Mediocre government? I mean, we're talking about an organization that's cost the American people more money, that's created more poor people in this country, that's killed more people in this country than any other. I mean, and I don't say that lightly.
You're gonna have to back that up with some facts.
Yeah, that's just kind of some
ranting
off the top of your
head. I
head.
can do that.
Nice rant.
I mean,
okay, go ahead.
The CAFE standards have killed more people in this country than I mean, it's dramatic. I mean, there are estimates of upwards of 2 million people a year.
Hey, Paul, go ahead and explain what the CAFE standards
Why?
are.
You have to tell me why CAFE standards lead to 2 million people's deaths.
Before you say why, go ahead and explain what the CAFE standards are for those who don't know, if you would, Paul.
CAFE standards are fuel standards. It essentially makes it so that cars have to be more efficient. All pretty and wonderful, put a nice stamp on it and it sounds great. But the problem with those standards are they have to make the cars lighter. That's the only way to make that standard possible, is to make the cars lighter. I mean, sure, you can make more efficient engines, but we kind of topped that out. There's not much further that we can go. We're doing a little better here and there, but, it's
not entirely true.
Okay, hold on, Paul. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, back in the 1970s, Honda's Civic used to get something like 40 miles to a gallon, and now that's down to 35, and they're trying to advertise that as a fantastic fuel-saving car. There's also a documentary put out called Who Killed the Electric Car? There was a car, I think, Chevy put out 1970. I can't remember what it was called. That is probably better than still any hybrid or electric car put out now, and they pulled it off the market because they were having their funding threatened to be cut by the oil companies if they marketed the car and put it out on the market.
Yes,
the reason our fuel standards are where, well, they do have a huge influence in our government and over the car companies. I mean, they're a massive force out there. I'm not saying they're evil. I'm saying they're massively influential. And if someone's bringing something to the market that's going to take that influence away, they're of course going to fight against it. I mean, that's just anyone's going to do that who has a big market share. And so, yeah, saying that we're at a point where we're topping out our fuel efficiency is factually incorrect.
Oh, really? Where are the more efficient cars? I'd like to see it. I mean, I'd love for you to show me one that is more efficient than what we can do now, that isn't made lighter. They've had to make the Honda Civic much lighter than what it used to be in order to get that number. Yeah, they've made it more efficient. I'll concede that, absolutely. But they've also had to make it a lot lighter. And when you have lighter cars, you have less metal in them. When you have less metal, when you have an accident, somebody dies.
You know, I guess, okay, I see the correlation. I don't necessarily think that CAFE standards are the reason, do they contribute to the fact that there are lighter cars on the road? Yes. And then when those lighter cars hit a SUV, okay. It's a bit of a stretch to say the CAFE standards are the reason why those people are dead. But I can say this with absolute certainty. Without the EPA, we'd still be burning lead in our gasoline. Without the EPA, we'd still have chemical companies dumping chemicals into rivers and lakes. So I'm sorry, the correlation that the EPA isn't an effective form of government because there are lighter cars on the road just doesn't hold water.
Oh no, that's just one example. I mean, that's the most dramatic one, and most certainly, you may not see the correlation, but
I'd like to thank them for getting the drivers off the road.
I don't know if the EPA can take credit for that, Andy, especially since it hasn't.
Well, if they're killing the people that can't not hit light posts and smash into other people, then
okay,
hey,
fair point.
Natural selection in progress.
I see your point. Well, in that case,
I haven't died driving my car because I haven't slammed into something because I'm not a dumbass. So.
Well, I'd have to, just to throw in a curveball, and not that I'm on either side here, because, again, I don't know all the information, but while they have made them lighter, Paul, I think there have been some pretty significant advances in technology to say that, things like crumple zones, changing the design of the interior of the structure of door panels, things like that, to add reinforcement without as much weight, is just part of a technology improvement. And again, I don't know the comparison between better technology, lighter materials versus 1970 Oldsmobile tank. I mean, granted, the tank's going to win, but you're going to bounce around on the inside of the car a lot more on the tank because it doesn't have things like crumple zones and the airbags and things like that. And again, I don't know the science behind it, so I can't say that the newer technology is better. You may be right that the older technology with heavier ass vehicles is better just because of mass. But again, you take that mass and you go do some basic science class. The more mass you have, the more striking power that vehicle is going to have because the velocity is going to be much larger when you smash those two larger vehicles together versus when you smash two lighter ones together. I know I'm oversimplifying it massively, Danon, but go ahead. You can go ahead and correct me if you like. I'm just throwing out a simple idea. You're not.
It's either inertia or momentum. I always get those.
Yeah. That's I'm lost on the right terminology too.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys. Well, listen. I would like to go ahead, Dan.
Well, I don't need to get into it. I was just going to say, if we're talking about the EPA, that my gripe would tend to be with the restrictions that it places on people building and expanding in farmland. That I'd have to look up source for this, but a couple years back there was farmland that was in basically they couldn't irrigate it because of some shrew that was protected by the EPA or something. Who knows? It cost a lot of money.
Or a snail darter?
Product. Pardon?
Or a snail darter?
Yeah, no, it was something like that. And that's generally my gripe, but we don't need to get into that. Although before you end it, I would like to throw in that Richard Nixon created the EPA, so all the Nixon-hating liberals should give him a little bit of credit.
All right, go Nixon. All right,
Damn it,
guys.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, all right. Well, Andy had the point.
Oh, well.
Andy, you get the assist on that then. You get the assist.
Whatever, Dana gets it.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate your time. We're going to keep this at around a half an hour just to make the first episode a little more palatable. So thanks again, guys, for coming on the show. And any viewers, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to post down here or over there, wherever the hell it is, depending on where we put this thing. But again, guys, thanks again for your time. We'll hook up again next week for another topic. Have a good night.
Good night, all.
Goodbye.
Night.